My name is Barbara Torris. I'm 75 years old. Madeline is my granddaughter.
First question. What was your life like when you were a kid?
I was raised in a very, very small town. There were less than maybe 700 people in that town. My school class had 17 people in it. It was very simple. We walked everywhere we needed to go. We didn't have a lot of money, but I lived very, very well because I was an only child and my parents doted on me. So I had what I would consider to be a charmed childhood.
Second question. What is a vivid memory you have from your childhood?
I remember digging in the dirt, believe it or not, and I remember how it smelled when I would work in the garden with my father, or we dug a big hole in the hillside and we made a fort, and it was just a lot of fun, a lot of fun. And the other thing that I remember very vividly is reading. I read, and I would sit by the back door in the wintertime with the sun shining on me outside and finish reading the book for the weekend. I loved to read, and I still do.
Question 3. What were your parents like?
My parents were very, very good people. They were kind, and my father was an extraordinary person, and his grandmother was the one that took such good care of them.
If you could relive your teen years, would you?
Oh, of course. What I am right now is a result of the whole sum of my life. So, no, I wouldn't or couldn't change what was. So that's why you have to be very careful about what you do on a daily basis, because you can't undo it ever. You can't go back and undo it.
Yeah. Growing up, did you have any inside jokes with your family or friends?
Your great grandmother, Agnes, was very grumpy when she got hungry. And we all knew that. So when we would go camping or do something like that, we would always make spaghetti, and we called it spaghetti already because we would make it immediately. We'd get out of the car, get the fry pan out, get the stove out. We'd make spaghetti because if you didn't feed Grandma, she was really not any fun to be around.
Sixth question. How did you and Grandpa meet?
We were raised in the same town. We went to the same high school. We didn't meet. We were. We were always there. And we both loved to dance. And so our very first date, he took me to a dance. We also loved to go to the movies. And I loved the movies, and I always thought they were perfect. And Grandpa always thought they could have been better. That was the way it was.
What were your first thoughts when you found out you were going to be a mom?
Oh, I was so excited. But you have to understand, Maddy, when I was pregnant, that was your daddy, was my very first child. And we were in a world crisis at that time. Cuba, they've just now reopened Cuba off of the southeastern shores of the United States. And the Soviet Union was bringing missiles to Cuba, and those missiles were to be pointed at the United States. And Grandpa had just been out of the Navy for maybe 2 years, and he was in what they call the active reserves. And the chances that he was going to be called up to go to war at that particular time were very, very likely. It could very well have happened. And I made the decision that if he was going to go to war, we were going to have a child before he did that. And that's my thoughts were, yes, now it'll be kind of complete. Our marriage will be kind of complete. And those were my thoughts.
What was my dad like when he was young?
He was very busy. And smart. And do you know what I remember about your dad? I remember when he and your Aunt Susan were young, Your dad always wanted to be an actor. He was an actor. He just loved to have a play. And he, at Christmas time, he would dress your Aunt Susan up as Mary, and he would dress up as Joseph, and they would either get a doll and they would have the baby Jesus, and they would do a little play every Christmas about the Christmas story. He was just fun. And he came home from school with a joke almost every day. I always loved that so much. I always wondered where he got them. I swear to goodness he read joke books at school so he could come home and have a good joke for me at the end of the day.
Do you have any stories you could tell me that you used to tell my dad?
My great grandmother was an immigrant from Sweden, and her husband was too, and they had 4 children. And my great grandfather built the railroads in Eastern Oregon. He was the boss of a crew that built the bridges on the railroad, Union Pacific Railroad. So they lived in Huntington, Oregon, and someday your dad will take you there in a house that was in a house. Okay, now the story is about the house. They lived in a tent house for many, many years. In fact, until all the 4 children were born, I think. And in Huntington, it gets really, really cold. A tent house was really not a satisfactory way to live. And Grandma Seberg, her name was Anna Seberg, and one day Grandma Seberg got fed up with living in a tent house. And she said to Grandma Seberg, "If you don't build me a house, I'm going to move away, and I'm not taking the 4 children with me. I'm leaving them right here with you." And Grandpa Seberg kind of woke up, and he looked at her, and he sat down with the Sears Roebuck catalog, and he ordered a house from the catalog. Now that house, the last time I knew, was still standing there in Huntington. After all of these years, that would have been well over 100 years ago. That house was
Thinking about future generations and knowing they might hear this recording, is there any wisdom or advice you would like to share with them?
Remember, you're going to make mistakes, and they cannot be undone. But once you have resolved what you have done, to remember that the past really is just a memory. It doesn't exist. You can't undo it. You can't go back and change it. The past is what it is. So you live your life as though it's a building block in it, and that building block is what makes you a better and better and better person.
All the things that my grandmother said about her childhood reminded me of my life in America when I go visit every summer. The only thing that's really different is the school part. When my grandmother talked about some vivid memories from her childhood, she talked about gardening and books. And when she talked about gardening, I realized that my dad likes gardening, and that's probably where he got all his skills from. And also, she really likes books. I like books too, probably just as much as she does. Now I have something in common with her. When my grandmother talked about her parents, it kind of reminded me of some other people. They're quite similar. They are kind and extraordinary and helpful, just like they were to her. When my grandmother spoke of how she would, of course, definitely relive her teen years, I can't really relate to that because I'm just starting them myself. But she's just reminding herself, you can't go back and you can't do that. You just have to go along with your life after you go through those mistakes. My grandma spoke of some inside jokes she had with family and friends, and one was spaghetti already. And I just realized that my dad used to say that when I was younger, or at least I think he did. Maybe it was my grandparents. I just know someone I know said that whenever we made spaghetti. Speaking of how my grandfather and grandmother met, I've realized that my life compared to them is so different. They've stayed in one place most of their life, and they've had lifelong friends that they've known for so many years, while all of my lifelong friends are on the other side of the world. While my grandma was talking about her story of pregnancy, I could imagine everything in that situation and how stressful and scary it could have been at that time in the situation. My dad doesn't talk a lot about himself or his childhood, and so my grandma gave me all the answers to those questions I've had for so many years. First of all, he wanted to be an actor. I had no idea, and I would have never imagined that. Second of all, he once had red hair. 3, he had blonde hair. My grandma told me a story about her great-grandma, who was a Swedish immigrant, and how she was gonna leave her 4 kids because her husband wouldn't build her a house. The first thought I had about the story was, I'm part Swedish, and I had never known that. 2, I love history. I love knowing about it, and everything that my grandma told me about my great-great-great-grandparents was so interesting. Probably one of the best stories ever. My grandmother gave some of future generations, and in this case, you guys watching now, some advice. Even though she was talking to the camera and into the mic, I felt like she was talking directly to me because I felt like the advice was meant for me. I've made so many decisions in my life that I completely regret and I wish never happened, but her advice made me remember that it's all over, it won't happen again if you've learned from it. Thank God, and I thank her for that.